So you've got the people adding in. That's great. Good to see. Okay, I'll just leave it a couple more seconds to let everybody get in, and then we'll get on with it. From Hindustan, fantastic. Cape Town, Johannesburg. Yep, more Cape Towns. Thank you, Jennifer. Great. Well, in recognition of all of you who are here on time, I'm going to make every effort to start on time. So let's get into it. The end of this session will be an introduction to the Applied Directorship Program, our 11-month online program. The first 45, maybe a little bit longer if I get carried away, will be a lot of background, some framing around governance, some understanding about the importance of director, what it means to be a high performance director, what it means to be a high performance board, that kind of stuff, really to set the scene. And then right at the end, I'll go into the details about the Applied Directorship Program, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So as we go, please capture your questions in the Q&A box. Great, thank you, Kumar. So yeah, put your stuff in the Q&A box, and then we'll go through those at the end. And then also, if you've got specific questions that come up along the way, just make sure you jot them down somewhere in the chat, Q&A, etc. So again, if I haven't answered them by the end, you can pop them up and we can get on with it. So the reason I've put this title about, is it safe or still safe to be a director, is because it's a very common question. And with the governance frameworks changing in various countries, and I know a couple have changed in the African continent just in the last year alone, it's really important to understand what your role and responsibilities are as a director, so you can make sure that you're covering those off and you're actually doing the basics, as well as understanding what a high performance director looks like and feels like, and what you are doing in a boardroom to really earn that accolade. So we'll get on with a little bit of an overview about what CERDAR does. So for those of you who haven't heard of the name CERDAR or haven't heard of our CERDAR group before, the name CERDAR comes from the name for a lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition. So the concept is that climbing a big mountain is like building a big business. You need to prepare properly. You need to make sure you've got the right team. You need to make sure that everybody has had sufficient training. You know what the steps are that will take you to the summit. And the idea of the CERDAR is to lead by the hand, lead that group on that journey. So have they helped you make sure you've got the right equipment? Have they made sure that the team is fit and has the right equipment? Have they made sure that the route, at least the initial plan, has been set so we know how we're going to attack this obstacle? Have we made sure that we've got everything else and anything else we can think of ready and done before we start the journey? And all too often with a business, we tend to leave those kind of decisions until we're halfway up and wonder why we fail. So the idea of the CERDAR is to lead you on that journey and walk with you on that journey as you go up that path. And that's what we try to do as CERDAR Group, is to help you along the journey, not like a typical consultant where here's the report, thanks very much, and then we don't see you again. We want to work with you and walk with you on this journey to achieve what we call extreme business success and to summit your mountain, to build the business that you want to build. So we're along that way, along that journey, we've become the global leader in education, appointment and guidance of high performance boards specifically, and across privately held and family businesses. But we do also do a lot of work with NGOs, with listed companies, and with various other types of business, any type of business that needs help. And we've been going for 11 years, and what we're talking about today and what we have put into the Applied Directorship Program is really what we've learnt over these now 11 years that we've been around, and with the hundreds of companies that we've worked with along the way, to try and help them and support them to develop their skills. And along the way, obviously, we've started to put that into programs and training and all of the rest of it. What drives me is this concept and idea that good directors grow companies and great directors change lives. And what do I mean in terms of that difference? For example, if you're a driver, if you drive a car regularly, a lot of people think they're good drivers, but there are very few people that are actually great drivers. A lot of people think they are good directors because they're ticking the boxes, they're getting the job done, and based on their peer group, based on the other members of their board, it's okay. But what we're talking about in terms of great directors is truly high performance directors. Someone that has a really clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities. It's not just a tick box exercise. They're thinking of all of the different stakeholders that are impacted by a company. And that could be your clients, as well as your suppliers, your team, obviously. It could be the community. It could be your impact on the environment. All of those aspects are stakeholders in your business. It's not just about the shareholders. And if we get that right, then a business can fundamentally shift lives much wider than just the people that are directly involved in the business. So that's what we want. We want directors who are helping to look outside the business, see where the impact, where the opportunities are, where the risks are, where the business is making impacts broader than just what's inside its four walls. A little bit about me. So I'm originally from the UK, came over to South Africa in 1992, just in time for the elections, and have had no desire to leave. And lots of people come in opposite directions. I arrived as everyone else was going in the other direction. I fundamentally think that South Africa has enormous potential and continues to have enormous potential. Yes, we're going into a massive recession, but so are many other places. So what I'm trying to do with what we're doing in terms of the training, what we're doing in terms of the boards I'm sitting on, is to fundamentally make a difference in what we can control. Work with the companies, work with the products and services we can control and make a difference, create jobs, etc. A little bit about you. So let's see if we can get this poll going. Polling, start poll, launch poll. What I really just want to get some idea of is what is your role? So are you a shareholder, manager, director, non-exec director, independent director? And please tick multiple boxes because I want to see who is many of those particular characters, has many of those different hats that they're wearing. And we'll talk about this concept of 3 hats as we get into the program. So just take 30 seconds, quickly click on that box, and then I'll end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think nearly everybody. Come on, those last couple, you can do it. Good, all in, right, good, end poll, thank you very much. Excellent, really good spread. So share the results, really good spread. So what we will be talking about as part of the 3 hats is the different roles of shareholder, director, and manager. And the non-executive director and director training that we talk about at the end is get anybody that wants to be a director, is a director, or has the opportunity to be a director in the future. So you are all covered. There's all an opportunity for you to benefit from the training, but it gives me an idea of the different spreads of different hats that you're all wearing. So that's fantastic, thank you. What I'd like you to write down as well, either put it in the Q&A box or keep it to yourself and you can add it at the end if I haven't answered the question, is why did you want to attend today? What did you want to get out of today's session? If it's just to find out about the train, that's fantastic, and we'll talk about, as I said, at the end. Was there some other question about directorship that you needed answered? So what is your biggest question regarding a high performance board? And why did you want to attend specifically today if it's not directly around high performance board? And a couple of questions that you might want to think about if you haven't got one front of mind is, if you don't have formal board meetings, why not? If you do have formal board meetings, do you have independent directors on your board? And if not, why not? Because I really want you to think about the reasons that are holding you back, because unless you understand what is stopping you for doing something, it's really difficult to move forward. And the last one is, if you have a board, you have formal board meetings, and you might have independent directors, but why is my board not adding value? Why am I really not getting what I should be getting out of this board? Why is it not delivering the value to my organization? Why is my organization not growing at the speed I believe it should do? And the critical questions that we mentioned in the flyer, so hold me accountable. If I haven't answered these for you by the end, then please shout. What are the three critical components that enable a high performance board? We'll definitely be covering that. What is a high performance board? I'll be going through that in a fair amount of detail. And do you know how to reduce the risk and increase your effectiveness as a director? And it is possible to reduce risk and increase your effectiveness. And we'll be talking about that as well. So let's get going and understand that what we're trying to do is describe the end. Describe what a high performance board looks like and what being a high performance director looks like. And we've only got a few minutes today, so I won't be able to cover all of those aspects, but I just want to introduce you to that concept so that at least you've got some idea of where you might want to head, what the end game looks like, and then make a decision. That's what I want to try and achieve and get on that journey. But it's very difficult, as Stephen Covey said, if you don't understand what the end looks like, it's really difficult to understand and put together some kind of plan around making that journey, climbing that mountain. So what does a high performance board comprise of? There are three main components as we see it, and they're all maybe not equally valuable, but they're all significantly valuable. Now you've got the directors on the board, easy. But have you thought about whether that board is working as a team and whether that board is supported by a team, supplying the information up to the board and then allowing the board to communicate effectively back down to the organization? There's an hourglass, and that where there's 2 points cross is where the MD CEO sits. So you need a team to help feed the information up to the CEO so they can present good quality reports in the meeting that are succinct, that are helping and supporting the board to make good decisions. And then when the board makes decisions, how do you make sure, do you have a system that allows the team to pass that information quickly and effectively to the right place? And the third component is the methodology, which talks to that communication process. So it's about having templates for the particular types of reports you need to present. Have you thought about the timing of the process that you're running? In other words, how much time do you need to prepare before the board meeting? And are the board papers going out in enough time for you to prepare for the board meeting? Has the agenda been thought through early enough so that you can actually prepare succinct and board papers that are in alignment with that agenda? That's all part of that methodology. So it's board process, and then it's all of the pieces that come into play along that process that help and support the board to do a better job. Delegation authority, board charters, there's a whole swathe of stuff that falls under that methodology piece. You bring all of those together, and now you have an opportunity to really have an effective board. High performance director, this is our definition of high performance director. So high performance director is one who is obsessed with creating meaningful economic impact through their role on the board and the role their company plays in the economy. Furthermore, such a director is not afraid to have the tough conversations, as well as do the mundane aspects that together enable board success. There's a lot of stuff in a relatively short paragraph. So one of the first things that pops out is being obsessed about creating meaningful economic, and this could be social economic impact as well, but being obsessed about making an impact. So what are you doing between board meetings as a director? What research are you doing? What investigations are you doing? What networks are you tapping into that can help and support the organization you're on the board of to really make an impact? And then furthermore, as a director, is not afraid to ask the tough questions and have the tough conversations. So as an independent director, particularly, you need to be that lone voice on the board to say, but whoa, 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 just take a pause moment. We're missing a major opportunity over here. We need to seriously step back and think about not doing what we're doing. And really, really critical kind of conversation needs to happen now if it hasn't happened already in your organizations. What is that opportunity that can take us to the next level? And equally, we're not seeing, you guys are not seeing this massive risk. We need to just stop and get some more information, dig into this deeper, because I've got a sense that if we don't address this problem, we're going to put ourselves in all kinds of trouble. And then the mundane aspects. So the mundane aspects are preparing, reading your board papers, doing some research, having conversations with the MD to make sure that you're ready for the board meeting. All of those kind of things are admin, and they're mundane, and they're repetitive, and they're boring, and I just don't want to do them, but you have to. As a director, they're a key part of the value you add when you walk into the board meeting. So there's a reason why when we invest in other companies, we expect there to be more than 1 or 2 directors. And we inherently know that a board supports a business growth and increases its value. So investing in a company on the JSE, if that company only had 1 director, we probably wouldn't feel comfortable putting our money into that organization. And in fact, it would probably be quite surprising if that organization was outperforming its peers. Not unheard of, but it's unlikely. Yet in our own organizations, we do exactly the opposite. We try to hold on to everything ourselves. We try to do everything ourselves. We don't bring independent perspective onto our boards because we're fearful that they might take over control, or there's some voices in our little voice in our head that's saying, don't do this. The key component of adding an independent director changes the way the board thinks. It changes the way you see things because it forces you to think from a more strategic perspective. Because the only reason that person's in the room is to do anything and everything in their power in the best interest of the company, which we'll talk to a little bit in a second. So coming up to a high performance board. High performance board is one that through its rhythm and decision making holds the company accountable to a performance standard higher than it has ever had before, resulting in increased value, improved return for shareholders, and other stakeholders on a sustainable basis. Practically every other word in this paragraph has some big impact. Rhythm. You have to have a rhythm. You have to have a calendar of board meetings for the year. They're either every month or every other month. Minimum. We can't have quarterly board meetings. There's just too big a gap between the board meetings for the board to be really effective. If you only need to meet 4 times a year, you're not having the right kind of conversations. You're not looking at the strategy of the company often enough and enough detail. Are you making decisions? One company I spoke to a few years ago, I was talking to the CEO and he just it boggled his mind that he'd been on this board for over 1.5 years and they hadn't made a single decision. That is absolutely frightening. All they talked about was the group's financials and what was happening in the different divisions, and they let the individual division and MDs get on with it. As a group board, they made no decisions. That's a critical piece of what a board's supposed to be doing. And then holding the board company accountable to a performance standard higher than it's ever had before. As a board, you've got to be pushing the organization to reach its potential. If you are not pushing the organization to grow, in whatever that means in your industry, then it's busy dying. What are you doing as a board to make sure that everybody in the organization is being held to the right performance standard? And that starts from the very top. From yourselves, are you having board evaluations? Is there some kind of performance management process or measurement process for the CEO MD? Are all of the other executive directors involved in some kind of performance management process? And has that filtered down to general management and below in your organization? How are you holding the company to a performance standard higher than it's ever been held before? And if you do it, we've got survey results that have just come out. The results came out yesterday that indicate that if you have independent directors on the board, it increases EBITDA. If you do board evaluations, it increases EBITDA. Why? Because you're fixing things and improving things on a regular basis. If you don't measure anything, you can't change it. And all of those things come together and help increase the value of the business, profitability of the business, and most importantly, in an environment like we're in right now, the sustainability of the business. Will this business be still going in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time? And what do we need to do to make that happen? This is a great picture. One of my colleagues came up with it a while ago, and it just really, in my mind, frames the power of the boardroom, because it's quite a difficult concept to get across often. So as a director, you pull a lever, and that lever can shift company performance, but you're not in the organization. You're not doing things in the organization. You are pulling levers in terms of policy and process and those kind of things that help support the company to increase its performance. But the boardroom is the pivot. The boardroom makes that leverage effective or not. If there's nothing useful happening in the boardroom, then you don't have any leverage. If you've got a really strong board, then you have massive leverage and you can shift things really quite quickly. So it's, as a director, understand your role, understand the position, the relationships, all of that kind of stuff for you as a director. But in the boardroom, make sure you've got the right composition. Have you got the right people sitting around the table? Have you got different opinions? Have you got different contexts, different cultures, different languages, different anything that can help and support that organization to get a better perspective and build a stronger strategy? And is it being constantly renewed? Are you, as people are becoming tired and they're not putting as many good ideas in, they haven't got the energy anymore, are you rotating directors out? Because you need to keep independent directors independent. They have to be rotated regularly because they'll over time lose their independent perspective. As directors become more involved in other things, they may not not have the time to be effective on the boardroom. So you need to constantly be renewing and refreshing in evaluating your board to make sure that it's doing the best job possible. And if all of those pieces come together, now you can really shift company performance effectively with accountability and sustainability, etc. And this stuff is a continual work in progress. You have to continue to learn. Learning is a lifelong experience. You cannot stop. And in governance and leadership, it's particularly important. You continue to learn what's changing in the regulations, what's new best practice. Have I recently done any kind of work or read any books on the latest thinking around strategy, organizational culture, or how do I build teams? Any of that kind of thing. As a leader, we have to keep reading. We have to keep educating ourselves in order to stay on top of things and help and grow the business as fast and as effectively and sustainably as possible. So the foundational questions, one of the things we talk about a lot, and it's really important to understand this because this is where everything starts, is understand the difference between an organization that's established with a craft, behind a craft concept or craft mindset, and an organization that's established with an enterprise structure and an enterprise mindset. So craft is an age-old construct where a business was started by a master craftsman, and they had a particular skill and ability that they received some kind of remuneration for. And it was usually the church or the king or the local lord that paid for that service. The master craftsman then built a team of craftsmen and apprentices and maybe a lackey. And it was that channel of building up replacements for yourself. Now, often when we start a business because we've got a particular skill and ability, and we then service the market using that skill and ability. But if we carry on being the person that knows most about that particular thing, we are inevitably ending up building an organization based on the craft concept. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different from an enterprise because a craft is dependent on the individual. A craft generates its income based on one or two individuals. The best way to create wealth as a craft is to earn as much per hour as you possibly can, work as many hours as you possibly can, and take those profits and put them to some other asset. Property, shares, whatever it might be, because that's your wealth. That's the assets that you build outside the business are your wealth, because intrinsically the business does not have a value. It is not an asset of value because it's dependent on the individual. And as soon as you take the individual out, there's very little left. An enterprise is a completely different construct, which is based on shareholders, directors, management, but most importantly, it's based on a team. It's not reliant on an individual. Where does this concept of entrepreneur and enterprise come from? It comes from the same root, and the root word is entreprendre, or entreprendre, which is a French word for outcome, promise. So as an entrepreneur, you come up with an idea, you come up with a promise that you deliver to the market, and you undertake to deliver that promise to the market. The enterprise is the vehicle that is used to keep that promise, to deliver that service on an ongoing basis. So as an entrepreneur, the idea is, as an entrepreneur, you come up with the idea, you develop the idea, you take it to market, but the enterprise, this asset of value, then develops and supports and builds the systems to deliver that promise on an ongoing basis. And the bigger the promise, the bigger the space there is for the enterprise, and the bigger the enterprise ultimately. What is the role of a director? So the key components that a director has, key roles, is strategy, leadership, and the last one, which I can't see here. Sorry, it's so dumb. Governance. See, I'm human. Strategy, leadership, and governance. But the board is different in that it needs policy. It's designed to support policies and procedures. So you are, as a director, you are leading from above, you're leading from the top. And that leadership needs to filter down through the organization, which is why it's so important that you have that accountability, that you're holding each other accountable, you're having continuous evaluations to make sure as a board you are demonstrating leadership, and that you own the strategy. So the organization helps define the strategy. The organization and the CEO help develop and give guidance on what they think is the right strategy, but the board must develop and own that strategy, because ultimately the board is holding the rest of the organization accountable to deliver on that strategy. So that's the fundamental piece that is often misunderstood, is it's the board that owns the strategy and helps make sure that the organization delivers it. But you gather information that talk to development of that strategy from as many places as you can. And it could be from shareholders, from your stakeholders, from your staff, it could be your clients. Anyone can give you an idea that will help you develop a better strategy. But ultimately, once you decide on it, the board must own it and must make sure it gets delivered, and becomes a key component of how you measure the effectiveness of the board. Whereas the board then hands over or develops the policies and procedures so that the organization can deliver effectively against that strategy. So it's not doing the doing, it's making sure you have the guidelines and the frameworks and all of the things to help make sure that people know what they're responsible for and they know what they're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. So the concept of three hats is how you build this thing called an enterprise. So it's the roles of the three hats are the shareholders, which is multiple different voting rights. So shareholders are different and unique because you have power based on how many shares you have. Whereas the board is a team of equals, so you have one vote each, whereas shareholders might have 51% of the votes or 10% of the votes. There is power in how many votes you have, whereas a board, you are a team of equals. And then the management or the organization below the board is always going to be some kind of hierarchical structure, with the MD CEO at the pinnacle of that. And one of the reasons why it doesn't work very well often with joint CEOs is there's always a misunderstanding or miscommunication or a conflict between who is at the top and who is taking responsibility for driving whatever comes out of the board down into the organization. There's a hard line between shareholders and the board because shareholders have a very specific and limited number of rights. So a shareholder has the right to return on investment, they have the right to appoint directors, and they have the right to remove directors that they've appointed. And that's about it. They have some input into the overall promise of the organization because obviously they're funding it. So it's determining what kind of business it is. But as soon as you start talking about the operational aspects, that's not the shareholder's place. That's where the board comes in. So as I said, shareholders have very limited set of rights. They don't have the right to meddle with the strategy or get involved in the strategy or get involved in the operations. That's why it's a hard line. The board, however, has a much more up and down flow of information between the board and the organization for obvious reasons, because we're making sure that we're getting data up so we can actually have discussions at board level. And then when we make decisions, they need to be filtered down to the board, to the rest of the organization. Whereas the communication between the board and shareholders typically is an annual AGM or maybe bi-monthly, annual reports, where the shareholders have given a statement of intent to the board saying, this is the return we want, this is the dividend policy we want you to follow, and this is the business growth in value that we're aiming for. And then the board has to answer to that, deliver that, push back on that, and get clarity in terms of backwards and forwards about what the statement of intent is. But once that's been set, then that is the mandate the board then works with for the next period. And then reporting back on that mandate regularly. But it's not shareholders getting involved in changing decisions on a regular basis. So a shareholder's relationship with the company is intrinsically selfish because it's about getting something back. I've put something in, now I'm expecting something back. I've put my time in when I set up the company, or I put my money in when I set up the company, or invested in the company, and now I'm expecting some kind of return on that investment. Whereas the board's relationship with the company is entirely selfless. You are doing everything as a director in the best interest of the company. And in fact, there's all kinds of rules that stop you from thinking in your own best interest. So it's actually stated in law that you cannot put your own interests first. The complicated relationship is the relationship between management or people in the organization, employees in the organization and the company, because it's selfless in that you have a contract and you have specific things you need to deliver against, but it becomes very selfish very quickly as soon as you don't pay someone a salary, we don't give them the bonus they're expecting, etc. So that's why it's a two-way street. Now, looking at that diagram, it becomes really obvious that if you are carrying all three of those hats, as some of you in there indicated, if you are a shareholder and a director and a manager, when you're making a decision, which hat are you wearing in that moment? So it's critical to understand which hat you're wearing in which moment, and then how to manage it is to make sure you have different groups of people, if at all possible, that aren't all shareholders and aren't all directors and aren't all management. So bringing in independent directors at board level makes a difference because it forces you to have conversation that's a board conversation. It's a strategy conversation. If you have multiple shareholders that aren't directors or aren't managers, then it helps to support when you're having that meeting as shareholders that there's some people in the room that are only shareholders. They're not going to want to talk about operational aspects because they're not part of it. They just want to know what their return looks like and what the strategy looks like and what the goals are of the organization that's going to deliver on their shareholder statement of intent. And the board obviously needs to try and control its engagement in operational micromanaging. The idea is the board sets the scene, sets the policies, sets the strategy, and then the management deliver on it. And one important question, or important answer is you cannot own a business, just like you cannot own a human being. So a business, when you register your PTY, it is a juristic person. It has the same rights as a flesh and blood person. So you cannot take the assets that are owned by the company and use them as if they're your own, because it's not true. They are owned by the company and they must be used by the company to generate revenue, income, growth, whatever it might be that those assets are there for. They are not yours, even if you are 100% shareholder. So it's important to get your head around that, because if you don't, you can get really badly caught out if anything goes wrong. And in fact, when Carl Bates wrote Traversing the Avalanche, we originally had the reference to business owner in that book. And when Mervyn King agreed to write the foreword, he read the book and he said, well, no, I can't write the foreword. And of course, mad panic. Why can't you write it forward? Why can't you write it forward? And the only real reason was because the concept of business owner does not exist anywhere in any legal context. You can be a shareholder, you can be a director, and you can be a manager. So the term is shareholder manager that covers all three, not business owner. So we had to change that context in the whole book. Director's duties, so legal foundations. The main ones are the care, skill, and diligence, and then the fiduciary duties. So I'll talk about the care, skill, and diligence a little bit more in a second. But the fiduciary duties are around acting in good faith. So there's talking about putting the business first, the selfless relationship with the business, doing everything in the best interest of the company and avoiding conflicts of interest. So that's also the same kind of concept. You're making sure that you're only doing stuff that benefits the company, not someone else or yourself or one member of your family or whatever else it might be. And if that conflict exists, particularly in the boardroom, then by law you have to leave the room. You can't just not be party of the conversation anymore. You have to actually leave the room. So again, if you don't have any kind of independent directors in the room, it may be quite difficult to take a conversation forward without being intrinsically conflicted. So anything to do with personal gain, to not use your position either as a director or an executive director, independent director, non-executive director, whatever it might be, for personal gain. So whether that's saying, well, I'm on the board of so-and-so, therefore you must give me a better deal, whatever it might be. No, you will get caught out horribly. And exercise powers for which they were granted. So as a director, you have very specific responsibilities. Where this becomes particularly important is where you've been, the board has delegated powers to a committee. So there should be some kind of terms of reference that defines what powers and decision-making abilities does that committee have. And if any members of that committee go beyond the powers for which they were, the purpose for which they were granted, then they should be held liable. There should be some kind of backlash, some kind of pain, either removed from the committee or there's some kind of written warning. Something should happen, but all too often it doesn't. It doesn't even get picked up, or it just gets ignored. The care, skill, and diligence part is the critical part, particularly from a South African governance perspective, but I think it's becoming more and more relevant and prevalent in other areas of the world, not just Africa. And it's all about your approach to decision making, making sure you've got the right knowledge and understanding, commercial acumen, that you're involved in self-development on a regular basis. And this diligence part is absolutely critical. Are you preparing? Do you have the correct attention to detail? All of those kind of things to make sure that you are doing the best job possible. And it's extensively recognized that governance increases your bottom line and the financial results achieved from shareholders and other stakeholders. I hadn't thought about this particular slide at the time, but a couple of days ago I was talking to a friend of mine who works as a venture capitalist. And his comment was that more and more often, he's having to say to companies that he's now starting to look at whether he can buy them or not. He's saying, look, sorry guys, but you are just not investable. And the reason why they're not investable is because they just don't have basic governance principles built into the way they're doing things. They're not doing regular financials, or they just don't have any kind of policies or anything written down that helps define how they make decisions, or they just simply don't write down when they've made a decision and what the decision was so that they can go back to it later. So there's no regular meetings, there's no thought about the roles and responsibilities, they're not defined. All of those kind of things need to be in place for an investor coming in to really get a clear idea of what they're buying. So it's just basic fundamental governance stuff that even for a very small company needs to be in place to really demonstrate that this business is an asset of value. It is an enterprise, it's not a craft. I'm going to be very reluctant to buy a business that is obviously set up as a craft, because it's really difficult to see what the value is if anything happens to the founder and that master craftsman in that organization. for master craftswomen in the organization. So hopefully we've done some of this stuff, if not all of this stuff. What are the key critical components? So we talked about director, the team, and the methodology. What is a high performance board? So it's really understanding that how you're holding the business to a level of accountability has never been held before. Are you making sure you're doing everything in the best interest of that business? Are you helping drive and support it to fulfill its potential? Too often businesses just stagnate because the founders or the board are comfortable and it's okay. But that business has so much more potential, can really have a massive impact on the market it's working in. And it's just such a crying shame if it doesn't generate the jobs that economies need in South Africa and Africa. And do you know how to reduce your risk and increase your effectiveness as a director? So the main parts of that, which we really had no time to delve into, is making sure that you cover off those aspects of care, skill, and diligence, if nothing else. And then the other aspect that you need to be really careful of is where there's any kind of possible potential conflict of interest. So if there's a breach of that conflict of interest, that's potentially a massive risk. If you can be demonstrated by the reasonable person test that you really didn't take any care when you were making a decision, you really didn't make sure you had necessary skills and understanding of governance when you made a decision, or you really didn't dig into it and do a due diligence exercise when making a purchase or getting involved with a new client or whatever it might be. So this short list is how you make sure you reduce your risk, but also if you get it right, then you end up increasing your effectiveness as a director as well. So you can do both. Just to mention that the survey, as I said, has just been released. So if you'd like a copy of that survey emailed to you, please put it in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we go through that chat box after the webinar and email it to you. We'll email the link to you. I gather that when Jenny's online, Jenny, if you can put something in the chat, the link to that download, or one of the other members of the team that's in the chat, if you can put the link into the chat box so that everybody can see it and click on it. But it's the survey of doing a survey of businesses, privately held and family businesses across Africa last year. So it's 2019 data. And the key things that came out of it were that boards who do not have independent directors do not perform as well as those who do. Diversity, unfortunately, in the boardroom is still lagging. We're on the companies that we looked at, 30% had no women on their boards. So my first question was, well, 30% of those companies not have any kind of product or service that women buy, let alone the impact that bringing a women's way of thinking into a boardroom can help to make a business more effective. There have been people on various TV programs, where the investors' TV programs, where they specifically said they would prefer to invest in women-led businesses because they're generally more sustainable and they generate better returns. So why don't we have more female members in boards? I don't know. So that, again, it's really still lagging and we've got to shift that. And one, which probably the more surprising in some ways than even the not having enough women on boards, is we're not conducting board evaluations of any description. So 44% of the people who responded had never done a board evaluation, let alone not done an annual one. So it's, again, if you want to be effective as a board, you need to measure your performance, and you need to do that at least once a year. So think about those aspects. Have you got independent directors on your board? And if not, why not? Have you got women on your board? And if not, why not? And are you conducting regular evaluations of your board's performance? And if not, why not? Because it's just as important to evaluate yourselves as a board as it is to evaluate your team members. Okay, so that was the sort of framework background. Any questions on that before we move into giving some information, providing some information on the applied directorship program? Just quickly pop something in the Q&A if you've got a desperate question. Okay, what suggestions do you have for, thank you, Toby. What suggestions do you have for people concerned about taking on directorships, especially in the SOE space, because of reputational risk, RE corporate governance, and recent court judgments declaring directors delinquent? My fear is paralyzed by fear. Yes, I mean, that's exactly the point I was mentioning about. It is possible to reduce your risk. And also when investigating a company, so someone's laid a claim against a company and they say that the company's done X, Y, Z, they've polluted a local river or whatever it might be. The first place that the investigators will look is obviously the board, but they'll also look at whether the independent directors could reasonably have known about this, or whether it was the managing director or his team that failed in their duty, and there was no way of easily working out that that was happening. So that's why it's important that you make sure, in terms of a directorship, you make sure that you are asking the right questions. If the financials look a bit too sort of high level and not enough detail, dig into it. If you're seeing trends of things going up and down, but there's no real explanation, dig into it. If you investigate, look up the company's brand on Google and see if there's any news reports coming out that you weren't aware of. Go down the supply chain and dig into the various companies and corporations along that supply chain, logistics chain, to see if there's any red flags that pop up. That's what you do to make sure you reduce your risk as a director. And if the board's running effectively and your directors are interrogating at that level, then it's highly likely or highly unlikely that you will have a big risk. And part of a board process should be mapping out the risks to the company. So if you're doing all of those things right, and you've got board papers to demonstrate that you went through a deep dive before you made a decision, if you've got some kind of proof to back up that you actually took care, skill, and diligence in your approach, then you have a much, much better case of protecting yourself. And you are certainly, unlikely, maybe possible, it's unlikely that you'll be declared delinquent, because you've done everything that you were supposed to have done. And if you do everything you're supposed to have done, then there's highly less likelihood that the company will get in difficulties in the first place. And I've been through this process of a company ending up being taken to court by one particular individual. And at the end of the day, the reason why they backed down was because we had so much of the process that we'd followed documented, and we checked to get legal opinion if we weren't sure, and we'd written that down. So because they knew the organization was in trouble, but we wanted to make sure we'd done everything we possibly could to get it back on its feet. And when the day came, when the shareholder said, sorry, we've got no more money, we can't put any more money in, then we immediately took the decision to put it in liquidation, because that was the right thing to do in that context as a director, and we had to make that difficult decision. So that's really sort of a long-winded answer. It's following the rules, but applying your mind will help make sure that you reduce your risk. And if it's investigated and it pops up, well, so-and-so, Toby was the guy who waved the flag and said, guys, there's a problem here, then there's far less risk of you being the one that's declared delinquent. What's the best way to, let's just do this last couple and then we'll move on. What's the best way for a manager to handle directors with conflicts in interest when they report to them? Difficult. Thank you, Abel. It's a good question. Probably need to have a conversation with you offline, and I'll put my details up at the end. Happy for you to send me an email or drop me a line or give me a call to understand better the context. But it would start with a conversation. So has that director got an understanding that a conflict of interest has actually been breached? And depending on your relationship, you may or may not be able to have that conversation. Otherwise, you need to find someone else who's one of their peers and discuss not necessarily that specific situation, but make them aware. Send them a link to a webinar or have a conversation in a management meeting, whatever it might be, to help expose them to the idea that this is what a conflict of interest looks like, would be the first step. In other words, education. then it would be starting to build a case and whether you've got sufficient details that you could go to that individual. So look, I'm really concerned about this. This is potentially a problem in the future, whatever the context might be. Difficult conversation, but it's all about the relationship. So can you have crucial conversations upwards in your organization and downwards in your organization? Becomes an organizational culture issue as much as anything else. So difficult to answer with any kind of specifics, but happy to have a conversation if you'd like me to. Then last question, are there hardline differences between public sector boards, government, semi-public and private sector boards? So the main difference is the rules you have to abide by. So it would be the specific regulations, the specific mandates you operate under, whether you have to have specific things in your MOI, whether there's specific things in the way you don't have shareholders. So how does if there's members or there's whatever the body is that starts this organization, how does that work? But basically as a director, you still need to follow all the same rules. You still need to demonstrate you've made decisions that are well thought through. You need to make sure that you've got a strategy. You need to make sure you're delivering against that strategy. You need to make sure that the business is sustainable, ideally profitable, even if it's a not-for-profit. So any business entity should be run as if it's a for-profit business in the way it's run. But there will obviously be different rules and different aspects that apply along the way. But if you professionalize the way the business is run, then you won't go too far wrong. And a friend of mine built what is quite a significant charity and has stepped off the board because he said, I've been on the board for 10 years. It's now up to the next generation to take it forward. The board has been created. Now it's up to the board to take it forward. I'm just getting in the way. But it started with building a business using people with charity experience and realizing that just wasn't working and ending up building a charity with professionals running it and using half as many people, twice as productive, etc., etc. So I would highly recommend, doesn't matter what the entity is, try to run it in a professional way as if it was a private business, as if it was a corporate. Thank you for your questions. Okay, let's get into the program. So mountaineers, we love this analogy. That's what Serdar is all about, is helping and supporting you to climb your mountain. And in the mountaineering context is the same as in the director context. You don't learn to be a director by reading a book, just like you don't learn how to climb a mountain by reading a book or doing a degree. You need to actually spend practical time in the boardroom to understand the process, to learn the lessons, to try things, fail, try something else. And that's a fundamental part of the reason why we developed the Applied Directorship Program the way we did, was to make a foundation of it practical experience. So as part of the program, you will experience 8 high-performance board meetings, run the way we think they should be run, and you act in that space, working with real board papers or as realistic board papers, working with a simulated company, making decisions, deciding what the financial levers you want to pull, and then getting financial reports that indicate how well you've performed. So as far as possible, we want to make the training like serving on a board of a company that has monthly board meetings. So that was the context. And we also understand that some people prefer to do something to learn how to do it. Some people prefer to read about it. Some people prefer to watch a video first and then do it. So we've tried to bring in all of those different aspects of learning into the process as well. So there's a lot of videos, there's audios, there's self-reflection exercises to try and bring in every different way that you're going to learn to be a better director as part of the way the program's constructed. So just to get some sense of whether this program might be something you want to do, if you run a business and are looking to implement a evaluating board, then this is a great way to start. Because often one of the biggest fears of building a board is not knowing what the thing's supposed to look like, how to take the first step, and not having any experience as a director, as an independent director on a board, or even experience as any other board other than the company you work for or run or found, means that you need to learn a much broader context. Because otherwise what happens, you bring someone skilled into your board, and if they know significantly more than you, they tend to dominate the conversation. So the best place to start is to bring your level of understanding and skill, we talked about this earlier, up to a point where you are maybe not equal, but at least you've got a really good understanding of what should be happening and what your rights and obligations are. You're taking over a family business and looking to be recognized as a director that has skills and knowledge to fulfill this role. Again, same thing. You don't want to be coming onto a board without the requisite skill and understanding. You don't want to be a seat warmer. And particularly in a private business, this is one of the reasons why we have focused so much on private businesses, is most private businesses don't understand the value of the board. They don't have to have a board, so they don't end up with a board. And they don't develop the skills throughout the generations about how to operate and how to run a board. So if you've got to that second or third generation, you're realizing this business is a sizable organization now, you need to have some kind of formality at board level. Then the best way to get the next generation involved is to make sure they get proper training and then give them the opportunity to serve so they can then practice this new skill. Looking for your first appointment as non-executive director. So as I mentioned, most boards are good or actually not good at all. They're not operating effectively at all. So you're not necessarily learning from the best tutors. So it's a bit like learning to drive from your parents that might have learned drive 30, 40 years ago. The rules on the road were sometimes different. The way the test is taken is definitely fundamentally different. And even your hand position is now different. So you're learning bad habits that you cannot use to move forward. So start afresh, learn the right way, straight away, and then move forward from there. And also, if you've got no experience on a board, to come out of a program where you can definitively say, I've been through the process for 8 board meetings, and we can back up anybody who asks us to say, how did this person perform with the certificate of competence, or whether it's just a phone call with the facilitator. It gives you a starting point. You're not starting at zero. So you've got stories to tell, you've got books you can refer to, you've got the videos on the program that you can refer to and say, look, this is how I would do that. This is how I would do the other. So you come across much more effectively in an interview when you try and get that first non-executive director position. Come up with more across with more confidence, and you display more skill. You have an opportunity to become a director and you want to make the most value-adding contributions in the boardroom. Becoming more and more the case in the South African context with the BEE rules. Don't be put on a board and not be in a position to add value. It's the same as one of the earlier points. Make sure you can add value from the moment you walk in the room. So we were talking about applied directorship program. And we're talking about what contexts this training could be useful. So first appointment as a non-executive director, obviously making sure that you have the right skills is critical. You're given an opportunity to become a director. So again, making sure you have the right skills, that you can go into the boardroom with confidence, knowing what your responsibilities are and how to add value quickly. You want to develop your skills further. So you've already been a non-executive director, but you realize that as part of this ongoing learning, you actually need to do a bit of a refresh, check in to see what best practices look like. We've had quite a few people who've been on multiple listed boards, who've been directors for 20, 30 years. They've got a really good grounding and understanding what it means to be a director, but they've taken the decision that they needed to up their game, develop new skills, get a better understanding of what's happening in the Companies Act, whatever it might be, get on board with the latest thinking, and have come back and said, I wish I'd done this 10 years ago. It would have made such a difference. And I really am looking at my role from a whole different perspective. And then the last one on this list was you're an executive director supporting the broad process, which talks to a question we had earlier. And if as an executive director, you really understand, or not even as a director, but even executive manager, if you are reporting up to the board, if you're providing information and data to the board, if you're providing the board papers that go into those board meetings, it's really, really valuable if you understand how the whole process works, because then you can drive the conversation about how to do things better from a place of confidence, from a place of knowledge, and even from a place of skill, because you've practiced this stuff. And we've also got one client who's been on the periphery of the board for some time, and he's done all of our training because he wants to be in that position where he's driving change at board level from a place of understanding, from a place of knowledge. And they may not ever change that board, but it doesn't matter because it's already impacting and improving the performance of the organization, because he's bringing that thinking into the way they run all of the other operational aspects. So what do companies say? What have we tried to bring into the training? They're saying, give us directors who've practiced their skill and experience in the boardroom. And that's always the difficulty with a training course. How do you do something other than teach theory so that you can come out at the end having demonstrated some kind of practical application of the learning? So the reason why the structured on that monthly basis, so it's 11 monthly 4-hour sessions, and the idea is 8 of those sessions can contain practice board meetings. So we'll go through the detail in a minute, but that's the structure. So there's a meeting every month, same day of the week, same time of day for 11 months to simulate the amount of time it takes, the way you need to build your calendars around important board meetings, as if you are on the board of a company that has a monthly board meeting. And then you actually have board meetings. So for 2 hours of those 8 sessions, you are doing a board meeting. You're involved in a board meeting. Someone is the chairman, someone is the secretary. You are going through the board papers, asking the questions, coming to decisions, so that you can say, I have practiced this skill and I have some experience in a boardroom. And just because someone has been a chief executive does not mean that they will know how to relate to me as a director. A chief executive role is very different from a director role, because you're going from the apex of that pyramid we showed earlier on the 3 hats slide. You're going from being the person at the pinnacle of that, where you are making the decisions and you're in a position of authority over the rest of the organization, to now suddenly you're part of a team of equals. No one should be dominant in that context. No one should be taking all of the decisions. It's not down to one person's perspective on what is the right thing to do. It's the team that must have that conversation. So often the more successful a chief executive has been, the more difficult sometimes it can be to step into that space on a board. So it's something to bear in mind. It's a different skill set. We want to know that you, Serdar, can confirm they know what they're doing. So companies, when they approach us, are looking to us to be able to say from a position of confidence, we know that Director Fred Starbull is absolutely the best person for the role in your organization. They've got the skills they need, they've done the training, etc. So it helps us if someone's been through the Applied Directorship program, because we've had an opportunity to view that person in action, to get an understanding of their commitment, to get an understanding of their knowledge and skill in a boardroom, because we've witnessed it, as I said, at least 8 times. And it's not about certificate of knowledge, it's about an understanding and value add. So this is not an exam process. It's a practical application with self-reflection exercises and homework that you need to do about learning, reading and watching, etc., as I've mentioned. But it's about you having an understanding of how to apply it, how to add value in that room. You know, to walk into a boardroom with confidence that you know what you're doing. That's what we want. We don't just want a certificate saying you passed an exam. That's why it's self-reflection exercises, not exam questions. We want to make sure that you take that approach when you finish the course, and you do self-reflection exercises after each board meeting. What went well? What didn't go well? What could our board do better, etc. So you start getting into that habit and that rhythm that we talked about. All of these things come together and help support you to be a high performance director in a high performance board. Becoming a value-adding high performance director requires time. So that's the other point, is to try and make sure that if you have the time for this course, then you are very likely to have the time to be an independent director, or even be a properly committed director in the company that you're currently part of. If you don't have time for the course, then there's a likelihood you don't have time to be an effective director. So that's the sort of the question. If someone said, I don't have time, well, then you probably don't have time for what you're looking to do next, which is become an independent director or whatever it might be. Because it takes time, commitment, guidance, all of those things to make sure that you are fully up to speed. You have the skill to do what you need to do. So we've taken the view that this is not like an MBA. It's not built like an MBA, but we've used the sort of best practices of an MBA. The main fundamental difference, because we get asked this question a lot, is this is focused on directorship. An MBA is focused on being a better manager. So it's not about management topics on our course. It's about strategic topics. It's about understanding how to build a strategy, understanding how to build an organizational culture, how to develop effective leadership. It's not about HR and sales and marketing. They are the operational, the management aspects once that strategy conversation has happened. So yes, you need to understand what happens next, because if you understand how this gets converted from a strategy into action, then you're going to come up with better strategy. But the point of this training is to develop better directors, not to develop better managers. And it's 1 week's program, as I said before, versus an extended program. We've taken the route of doing an extended program because if you crush everything into one small period of time, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it might be, once you've finished, you haven't practiced this skill often enough to have deeply absorbed it. You've done everything in too clinical a way. Life hasn't got in the way. Finding time to get to the sessions or have the sessions, to have your board meetings with your team, hasn't got in the way of all the operational things you're running around doing on a day-to-day basis. Because if typically on a week program, you block the week out, you're in a particular place, you stay in that place, you get the job done and you move on. We want you to work out how you're going to fit this in with the rest of your life. So we're forcing you to think like you would if you were actually running board meetings. You need to fit this 4 hours in, and you need to fit all the preparation you need to do in with everything else you need to do in your life. And if you get that right, then actually implementing it in your organization or implementing it as a non-executive director is so much easier. And it's very much not theory versus simulation, it's both. So we cover the theory in the online platform. So it's like it's like any other online program. You can access that information whenever you like, whenever it's convenient for you. You can, whilst you're sitting in your car or you're on Sunday when the house is quiet, put your headphones on and listen to some of the videos. Whatever makes sense in your routine is how you absorb the theory stuff. And then the simulation is specifically on a specific date at a specific time each month. So as I said, the structure is 11 modules. The first is the introduction, go through the 3 hats in a lot more detail, go through director's duties in a lot more detail. In other words, the stuff I've touched on very briefly today, we'll go through in a lot more detail. Part 2 is when we introduce the concept of the contribution compass, which is a profiling tool we use. And I'll show you what it looks like in a second. It's a profiling tool we use because we've identified a number of years ago that if you don't understand the profile of someone, in other words, the way they think in a team context, and their attitude and aptitude and their skills, then you're going to have an incomplete picture of that individual and their potential contribution. So the key part that we struggled with for some time was finding a tool that worked in terms of the contribution of someone in a team. So there's Myers-Briggs, there's Insights, there's DISCI, there's Wealth Dynamics, all of these tools that they do a job, but we couldn't find something that specifically worked in the context we needed it for. So we developed Contribution Compass a couple of years ago to do that. And that's part of what you receive in the program as a Contribution Compass profiling token. Once we've got your profiles done, then we build the board using that as part of the process. So we want to make sure that the boards that you put together as teams, so if it's 15 people in the cohort, then there's 3 boards of 5 people, for example. Each of those boards is built around a blend of these natural energies or these profiles, a blend of skills, so we don't end up with one team that's all lawyers, another team that's all accountants, and another team is something else. We want to spread the skills over those teams. And we also want to try and spread ages, countries, and the fantastic opportunity of having an open program is we can actually spread people across countries. So you could be a South African sitting with a Kenyan, with a Ghanaian, I see there were some people from Nigeria on this call. It gives you a much broader ability to share networks and thinking and experiences, etc. So that's how we try and build a board. And that's the same process as we will build a board in the real world for a private company that we're working with. And then module 3, you start getting into the board meetings. So we go around the governance compass. Again, I'll just show you what it looks like in a second. And each section, each board meeting has a particular theme. So the first board meeting, strategy and direction. So you start thinking about what is your strategy for this simulated company? What are you going to do to differentiate your little company from the other 2 or 3 that are working in the same market in this software? Next one is organizational culture. Start to talk about how you translate the strategy into a culture to make sure they work together in an organization. Lots of videos on this topic. You may have heard of culture eats strategy for breakfast. All of those kind of things are discussed, and there's various videos that talk that through. Then you move on to performance enhancement. So there's a working paper about a performance evaluation for the chief executive. There's, again, lots of videos related to that topic, lots of readings, etc. And so it goes on. So 6 is about stakeholder engagement. 7, you start talking about shareholder expectations, dividend policies, how that drives shareholder behavior, all those kind of things. Number 8 is the risk appetite. So we talk about a risk matrix. How do you measure risk? And again, there are lots of different ways of doing it. So there's various readings and videos that will introduce you to some of those different approaches. Then we go into the 7th board meeting, where we talk about the finances. So how do you structure your finances? How do you structure debt? How do you report on it? What does a good board paper look like in terms of an income statement, balance sheet? All of those kind of things. How do you set a budget? Why is it important to set a budget? And then the last of the formal board meeting sessions, we go through the board evaluation process. So again, you get to experience what that's like. You actually do a board evaluation of the board that you've just done 7 board meetings with. And then a self-evaluation as a director. So again, it's that whole self-reflection, self-evaluation. How could I do better? How could I maximize my contribution? And then we've now added an 11th session by popular demand, because all of the first 3 or 4 cohorts said, look, we needed something at the end to be able to discuss our learnings, to share our insights, to talk about why did so-and-so's board do better than ours in the simulator, all of those kind of things. So that's what the 11th session's for. And if we were doing face-to-face, we'd have a big party, but I'm sure you can try and work out how to have a big party on the online instead. So every seat is precious, that's the point. We want to make sure that everyone sitting around the room adds value. And the contribution compass, which I mentioned earlier, is one of the ways of making sure that we have a spread of different energies. So there's 4 different energies, and each person has pieces of all 4, but they have a dominant profile. So there's 8 profiles, of which you have 1. And where that's typically displayed is what we call critical moments, where you are under stress, where you need to make a decision quickly, those kind of moments where you're not disciplined, you're acting based on your natural energy, your natural way of thinking. And a catalyst will come up with new ideas. They will try and solve their way out of the problem. They will throw ideas around all over the place to try and find something to hang on to that will take them to the next level. Whereas the sustaining energy, the custodian energy, is much more about looking at what we've already got and seeing if that's the problem. Rather than changing and reinventing and doing something completely new, what can we do better with what we've already got before we throw lots of time and hours into doing something completely different? So there are totally opposite ways of approaching a problem. And it's important that you have both aspects on a board, because they're both equally important. And the west and east side is refining. The west of this compass is about analyzing the data, going through and reviewing what the information is telling us. So I'm making a decision based on real data. I'm not making a decision based on what someone's told me. So I need to think about this. I need to dig into it. I need to review it. I need to make sure I really understand what's going on before I contribute to making a decision, which is totally opposite from the inspiring energy, where it's about talking through the problem before coming to a conclusion. Again, they are both very valid perspectives, but they are completely different. And it's important you have both aspects involved in the board decision, because otherwise you miss something important. And that immediately fits over the governance compass, which, as I said, is how we define the 8 board meetings that you go through, because the activating energy is typically good at coming up with strategy and direction. In this context, shareholder returns is really important in terms of making sure that you have the resources coming to the organization to take it to the next level. It's making sure your foundations are sound. If shareholders are not happy, then you've got a problem as an organization. So that's how the energy works in a board context. But it's also the risk and the stakeholder engagement either side. So those two go on top of each other. And it's important to understand that this is not a guarantee. So completing the program is not a guarantee that you will get a board appointment. However, it will prepare you as best we can, and it makes someone that we could recommend for a board appointment. So we have a database of people who wish to be put forward for non-executive director positions, and those who've done some training versus those who haven't naturally floated to the top. As I mentioned before, A, we've got some understanding of how you work and operate. B, we know you've got a level of skill. And lastly, if you've committed to going through an 11-month program, you've got demonstrated commitment that you can then translate to being a director on a board. Whereas if we've had no engagement other than a CV from someone, we can't answer those 3 questions. Program outcomes. So the idea is that reinforce and augment knowledge and understanding of the duties and statutory obligations. Develop an understanding of an effective and high performance board. So we talked about that, and an overall governance methodology. So you practice the governance methodology, you get exposed to the templates that we use along the program. So as I said, we're trying to make the boards as realistic as possible using the tools that we use on an everyday basis. And you can say you've experienced a high performance board engagement. So you've got an agenda, and this is how you use the agenda, so you build the agenda. You have a pre-board meeting to go through the agenda and review it before you go into the meeting. You have your meeting, there's your board papers, make sure you've pre-read them, etc., etc. So as far as possible, you get into the habit, get into the rhythm of how board meetings work. So when you take it out into the real world, and I know from personal experience, having done the course and even doing the work with the boards before, after the course, I had a much more ingrained sense of what that rhythm felt like, because I'd been through it in a very rigorous process. And you develop that habit almost without knowing. So when you go into the next board meeting, going, this doesn't feel right because we didn't do X, Y, Z beforehand. Or it doesn't feel right because this agenda's all over the place. It's not flowing properly. So it almost, you can't turn the page, you can't not see the other side of the coin. You end up having to implement this because you fundamentally understand that it's a better way of doing things. And ensure a working knowledge of the essential tools. So as we said, what does a governance board papers look like? What does an agenda look like? What do minutes look like? What are they supposed to have in them? What are they not supposed to have in them? How do you put together a calendar, meeting protocol? All of that stuff, you'll have practiced it, and you've been given an opportunity to learn about it at quite a deep level. Demonstrate practical experience in applying the methodology, identify, and one of the things that does come out of it is you've had a chance to be a chairman at least once. You've had a chance to be the secretary in the meeting at least once. And the rest of the time, you're obviously working through the board process. It's quite interesting how at the end of the program, a lot of people have said, I now understand that I don't ever want to be a chairman. It's not my role. I'm much better at absorbing information, listening, thinking things through, asking difficult questions or different questions, I need to focus on that. I can't focus on leading the meeting. And likewise, also, I can't focus on writing the minutes because it's too distracting. It takes me away from the topics we're discussing and focuses me somewhere else. I need to just be left to be an independent director where I can just focus on the work at hand. Don't give me the distractions. Me personally, I love being a chairman. I love the way, I love the flow, I love the preparation. I actually really enjoy everything about being a chairman. And I find it quite difficult to maintain concentration if I am the person who's sitting quietly and thinking about things and listening all the way through. I find I can engage much more effectively if I'm involved all the time at every level. But that's me. So it's understanding when you get to the end, what are my strengths? What are the potential opportunities? What don't I want to do? What do I want to do? What have I learned about myself in terms of the way I operate as a director? You receive a certificate of attendance if you attend enough sessions, so you need to have attended 9 out of the 11, and you receive a certificate of competence, which we won't ever get, well, unlikely to get registered as like with a CETA or something, because we're not doing a course that's constructed under any of their frameworks, but we're getting much more recognition that it's a certificate of competence with EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, with the Young Presidents Organization, with the Institute of Directors around Africa, and we're now trying to get some recognition with various universities that we've done delivery for. We've done training programs for their students, so you've got something you can take back to the businesses you work with, and particularly if you're getting sponsored by someone. I know it just because it gives a level of confidence that this is something that's worthwhile. So if you have no time for this, you have no time for the boardroom. So I mentioned that earlier. Program summary, so 11 months in total, maximum cohort of 20. So I checked before this webinar started, and we had only 4 places left for the 9th of July. So if you're really keen to get in, then you need to hurry because places are running out. If you cannot make it for the 9th of July start, then we'll take names. So I suggest you go back to whoever invited you to this. And if it was something you found on social media or some other perspective, you don't know exactly who it was in Sirdar that you spoke to, then by all means drop me an email. I'll send that around to the sales team to see if they've spoken to you, or if they were the person that sent you the WhatsApp or the email or whatever it might be, and we can take it from there. There's 3 or 4 boards, as I said, so if it's maximum 20, then there will be 4 boards. If it's 15, there will be 3. Minimum we would have is 3 boards, if at all possible. So we wouldn't run a program if it was less than 12 people, but I said we're 4 off having a maximum of 20, so this program is absolutely going ahead and will absolutely have at least 3 boards. We've got the 8 simulated board meetings. The sessions are 4 hours per month. It's either a morning cohort or an afternoon cohort. So you are having morning sessions throughout the program, or you're having afternoon sessions throughout the program. So depending on which which timeline you're in, it may be better, easier, or more difficult to be in one. So look for which one is going to be the most useful for you in terms of timing. 3 to 4 hours per week of preparation, where you read the books. So there's two books that you, at least one, the Traversing the Avalanche. I don't know specifically in each of the regions which is the legal book you'll be going through, but definitely Traversing the Avalanche. Read that book. You then have more videos at the beginning because you're not doing board meetings, but you still have videos that you need to watch throughout the program. And there might be some other readings. And as I said, there's usually some kind of self-reflection exercise attached to each of the particular topics. So if you can find 3 to 4 hours per week, then in our estimation, and having spoken to various people who've done the course, you should be okay and you should be able to catch up, keep up. If you leave it all to the day before the session, you're going to get yourself in trouble really quickly. If you don't manage to put the hours in at all and prepare properly, you will be found out very quickly by the rest of your board, etc. So it's about a rhythm. It's about a steady progress. It's about regular engagement. And a major part of this is you're going to be in a room full of like-minded individuals. There's no one going to be in the room for this course that doesn't want to be a director or isn't already a director. So you are in the best place possible to learn from each other. And we've covered that already. So we invite you to join the Applied Direction program so that you can challenge your thinking, improve your prospects, begin your journey as a high-performance director. And as Buffett says, the best investment is in yourself. Yeah, so the standard investment is 4,497 plus VAT. As I said, speak to the person who brought you into the program. They may be able to do some kind of deals in your particular country, but the default rate, and certainly coming up to a week to go, I think there's less opportunity for discounts. So just to let you know, that's the standard price, and we can do monthly payments if paying upfront is going to be too difficult. So there's various payment plans we can look at. You're with us for 11 months, we can make a plan. There's the link. Can I put that in chat? Not sure. Oops. That's the link. So it's bit.ly at ADP online, all capitals. So it's very straightforward. HTTP bit.ly ADP online, all capitals. And that's the application form. You will also get a link after this webinar. So anyone who's registered for the webinar will also receive that link. And that's what the application looks like. So it's a couple of pages, a few overarching questions, just to get a sense of what your experience level is and what you hope to get out of the program. Really just as a double check to make sure that you're really going to benefit from the program before we get you going. So it's an application form rather than a registration form. We have turned some people down because they just didn't have the right level of experience to be able to carry themselves through the course. Thank you very much. Any questions? And if you came through social media, you don't have a particular contact person, as I said, by all means, send me an email, give me a phone call, however you want to communicate, however you feel. I haven't got an Instagram account, but I can manage Twitter. Any questions? So I think the question box, all of those who asked questions before, hopefully I answered them, because there are none left now that the webinar cancelled and started again. So please put your questions in the box. How many people in the cohort? So I said maximum 20, absolute minimum is 12, but typically we work with minimum 15. So it's a nice small group, lots of opportunity to engage, to learn from each other, hear each other's stories. What else? We have a nice tie, thank you, Paul. Any other questions? So I just go back to that. So the only thing left to do is to type that link and sign up. I wish you all the best. Thank you for attending. Run over a little bit, but we did have a bit of a distraction in the middle. As I said, thank you for your time. Thank you for sticking all the way through to the end. I look forward to seeing at least some of you on the Applied Directorship program. And if you've got any other questions, by all means, drop me a line and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you and have a good evening.